Nik Bonitto says between he and the Denver Broncos, it's only a matter of when for a contract extension to get done. That could mean it's coming soon. We'll talk about that more here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Reno, it is your team every day. For all your Broncos news, content coverage, analysis, and more, this is the place to be every single day, all year long. So a special shout out to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for tuning in and making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you're not yet an everydayer, it's easy to become one. All you have to do is hit that subscribe or that follow button. That way you'll never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. We got a lot to break down here on today's episode of the show as Nik Bonitto returned to practice on Tuesday, but he talked about his contract extension and the talks that are going on right now between he and the team after practice. Where are they at? Could it be coming soon? We'll dive deep into that. Plus, Sean Payton doesn't care about wide receiver 2, 3, 4, or 5. He cares about the roles that this team is going to have for these players. We dive deep into his archetype there and why one player is hard for the Broncos to replace right now that is currently dealing with an injury. And then we'll go in through our Broncos news and notes with Dre Greenlaw returning to practice in full gear, ready to rock and roll as you set up for the final preseason game. You get all that on today's show. Sarah, my friend, it was great to see Nik Bonitto back on the practice field on Tuesday as training camp, the final week of it, has kind of gone through a little bit quietly here. This is where we're at. We're almost to the regular season. We get out there at practice. We see Nik Bonitto on the field. He's in full pads. He's doing team stretch. He's doing individual. He's doing full team period. It was a welcome sight to see, I think, especially as the season gets a little bit closer. Now, obviously, while we're glad to see him there, he talked a lot about his contract and where things are at right now between he and the Broncos.
Yeah, the transparency between Nik Bonitto and the Broncos has been really exciting, I suppose, if you want him to be part of the foundation and core of this team going forward, right? I think there's a split a little bit in the fan base. I wouldn't say it's 50-50 based on what I'm seeing, Cody, but I think there is a bit of a split in the fan base in terms of some want to see Nik Bonitto go out there and prove it again this season. Others are like, no, he's proven enough. Let's get him the bag now before the price continues to go up, which interestingly enough, I think he also referenced that as well. I mean, there's a lot going on right now with this whole situation, but let's just hear from the man himself, right? I mean, Nik Bonitto, update us on your contract situation. Let's hear it.
Going well. I feel like there's been good communication on both sides. I think, it's just my agent. I feel like he's one of the best in the game. I feel like I got to trust what he's doing and knowing how they feel about me upstairs. I feel like something will get done, but it's just a matter of when. And, until then, I just got to keep doing me.
We heard Mike Kliss say during the preseason broadcast, Cody, that he felt like because the similar agent situation that we could see something a few days before the start of the regular season, maybe even before that now, Cody. I think you get the impression like it wasn't quite the same as when Sean Payton was talking about Courtland Sutton's, and then you and I were kind of, all right, we better get our written pieces ready. We better get our breaking news episode of the podcast ready. Doesn't necessarily feel like we're at that point, but I mean, maybe we are.
I have a feeling it's coming soon. I think that something will get done before the regular season gets here, and it'll probably catch us at like a 5:30 a.m., and we're going to be up and at 'em, very busy, when that happens. But here's the thing I like about the Broncos and Nik Bonitto situation, because one thing he did say is that he's been in constant communication with George Payton, with the Broncos, and that communications have been great. They've reminded him, even when Courtland was getting his deal done, Zach Allen was getting his deal done, that the Broncos were still in conversation with him, making him a priority, saying, hey, we still want to get an extension done with you. We're getting this. And I think all along there's been this belief, I could tell you from Bonitto's camp and also from the Broncos side of things, where there is no impasse. Like, it's just working on getting all the framework together, what the incentives look like, what the fully guaranteed money looks like. Like, all of these things take time. Ideally we could go on Madden and do a contract extension, snap our fingers and be done with it. But it just takes so much more time and every little detail, because it's not just like, hey, we want to get you, let's say, a 4 or 5 year deal, but it's like, all right, what does that look like years 3, 4, 5? What room do we have? Void money? Like, there's so many different aspects to a contract that go into these conversations. And Nik's not focused necessarily on that. He even said himself is, I'm still under contract for another year. I'm just going to come out here and keep focused on grinding and continue to find ways to improve. Where are you at in terms of this perception of the Broncos and Nik? Just because I think we see sometimes these contract extension talks, they drag out so long, it kind of muddies the water, and you get situations like Cincinnati. That's not the case at all here with Denver and with Nik.
It starts with everything that Sean Payton always talks about with the ownership, right? How important that ownership is on down. You're just a well-run franchise as compared to a franchise that's not, because even when the Bengals were getting deals done, they were ruffling feathers with their star players. And that's not to say that you just have to play every player who plays well for your organization. You can't always do that, right? But at the same time, they've alienated a star pass rusher, while the Denver Broncos have made a guy feel so comfortable that he can go up to the podium and just freely talk about negotiations. You know, if negotiations were going poorly, first of all, you wouldn't see him at the podium. But second of all, if you did hear from him, it would likely be stuff like, I'm letting my agent take care of all that. I don't have anything to do with it. I don't know how things are going. Like, he would be trying to be way more coy about it, right? So I know he acknowledged that the agent is dealing with that stuff and that the timing is out of his control, but it seems to me like just the difference of how business is run is significant with Denver as compared to other organizations. And this is the George Payton philosophy, right? He wanted to draft guys and get them to a second contract with the team, and you get this deal done a year ahead of time, right? You get it done, like he said, yeah, he's in a contract year. He's still got a year left on his deal. This is why you get a deal done now, because next offseason, the percentage of the cap, edge players, all these different resetting of the market, XYZ, it's going to substantially affect the bottom line for him. So in a way, like, let's think about it this way. Nik Bonitto, Cody, he's doing the Broncos a favor by saying, let's get a deal done now, because he could just as easily wait till next year when the price would skyrocket.
Well, long story short, Broncos Country, things are going well between the Broncos and Bonitto. I think that something will happen here very shortly. And when that does happen, of course, you'll get an episode here, Locked On Broncos. We find out all the details. But that extension we expect to get done. Bonitto expects that to get done. That's a good thing. But let's get back to football here as well. I had a chance to ask Nik about the continuity on defense, because really for the Broncos defense, it is the same unit as last year with the addition of two elite-level premium players in Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw, guys that are going to make this defense even better. We talked about it, and I asked him about the continuity of this unit going into yet another season together.
It's been real good. I mean, a lot of the guys now have been in the VJ system for 3 years now, so it's kind of like in the back of our head what we have to do, all the checks we have to make. Obviously, catching the new guys up to speed, I mean, they've been great. They've picked it up really fast. So, I mean, it's been great so far, and I feel like with the more guys that are coming back from injury, the more time we get to play together, it's going to be even better. So.
This is just something the Broncos have not had the last handful of years, Cody. Continuity, and that extends not only to player personnel, but the coaching staff. And so it's really nice to see that continuity, and it'll be fun to all kind of collectively find out together just how much that really matters. Because like I said, how many times have the Broncos changed coaching staffs since the Gary Kubiak, Super Bowl 50, all that stuff? Like, they've changed it so much that it's really been difficult to get a grasp on just how important that is. I think we've seen it with Kansas City, how crucial that continuity has been with their roster and coaching staff. But Broncos fans haven't really got to experience that. And I think that's going to be something to watch this coming season, as that, like Nik said, you're now in year 3 under Vance Joseph with a lot of the same guys.
And that's so important too, because now you carry over already knowledge of the scheme, but now you can start to add things, little bits and pieces, tiny wrinkles here and there. And so much of it could change on a week-to-week basis. I mean, now you add, guys in the secondary where you believe you can lock up and play man-to-man coverage. You can send the house. I mean, we saw the Broncos be blitz happy last year. We saw them play a ton of man coverage. And now with the addition of Hufanga, Greenlaw, with guys like Cooper locked up, Bonitto more than likely going to get locked up hopefully before the season begins, you have just this dog of a defense you could just unleash on game day and say, hey, let's go after and get after people there. And with that, there's going to come some risk reward with being blitz happy or, playing some man coverage, but that's why you do it. Like, sending a 6 or 7 man rush means, hey, we're taking a chance here, because it could be timing and the perfect play could beat that blitz. and we might be in trouble. You're going to live with that, but this Broncos defense should be very, very good this upcoming season. Bonitto believes the same exact thing, and he's going to be a big reason why it is. Broncos Country, let us know your thoughts on the ongoing contract talks here with Nik Bonitto, and on top of that, the Broncos' continuity on the defensive side of the ball and strengthening two positions where they were pretty much a little bit down last year with adding Talanoa Hufanga to the mix, and now Dre Greenlaw, who returned to practice during Tuesday as well. We'll go through all that here on today's show. But coming up next, we're going to eye why Sean Payton doesn't care about your wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, or wide receiver 4. We'll tell you why he cares more about roles, and he'll tell you himself here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season, it's back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. This year, myself, Cody Roark, we are playing Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league.
Well, to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. And to kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into classics, you could still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL.
If you are a big fantasy football player, you're probably going to be wondering who's wide receiver 2 for the Denver Broncos? Who's going to be getting those targets right behind Courtland Sutton? Well, Sean Payton don't care about your fantasy football team, no matter how clever your name is or how good you are at drafting. It might be a streamer type of year, Broncos Country. If you want to use Broncos players in your fantasy football lineup, we're going to tell you why Sean Payton don't care about no wide receiver 2, 3, 4. These guys are all going to play, and they're going to play significant roles here in 2025. But before we get into that discussion, I want to say thank you so much to every single one of you out there that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. If you haven't done so already, hey, take a couple of seconds, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that and for investing your time in this show every single day. It means a ton to Cody and I. Let's talk about it, Cody, because fantasy drafts, I know mine is Wednesday. Mine's today. So, wow, I got to really prepare. This is the only draft that I do. And of course, my bent is always to try and take a Broncos sleeper or two. But you know what? When it comes to the wide receiver position, like, yeah, we've been trying to rack our brains all offseason. And I think there's like it's almost like this unwritten desire in your brain to have like okay, I want this pecking order. I want to know who's going to be first in line for targets, second, third, fourth. You kind of want to know that because you feel like going into a week gives you buttons, right? I would say it's going to be Courtland Sutton, Evan Ingram, the backs out of the backfield, J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey. Those guys will get a lot of work. But, man, trying to figure out who wide receiver 2 could be, that's been an impossible exercise all offseason long.
And for Sean Payton, he says really it's kind of by design because some teams, he said, the way that they are built, some teams will have a primary wide receiver, and the way that they line up, they'll have a number 2 guy who you can kind of designate as a wide receiver 2. Well, Sean Payton was asked a question by our good friend Mike Kliss after Tuesday's practice about the wide receiver pecking order and if there is a wide receiver 2 here for him. Here's what Sean had to say.
I think some teams are more predictable with where the X is and the slot and the Z and then in the term, the number 1, the number 2. I get all that. They're all going to play in different roles. And so we probably are a little bit different with our rotation substitution patterns that you guys can decide who 2 is and 3 is and 4 is. But there's going to be a role if they're dressing and they're getting on the field and they're not going to line up in the same spot all the time. I think that would be the easiest way to describe it.
We've seen that.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's been your perception out there, Cody? Because you've seen these guys at practice. Do you feel like do you feel like Sean is kind of saying that just to say it, or do you feel like there has been a better, clearer, I guess is the better word there, a clearer pecking order at this position?
Yeah, no, it's exactly how Sean has said it. And that's something I've been trying to tell Broncos fans all throughout training camp. Because I mean, you probably see that as well on social media. I get a ton of questions, as I'm sure you do, about who's wide receiver 2, who's wide receiver 3. And I've been telling folks there hasn't been this consistent, Courtland's the top guy. We know that. But they're rotating in 4 or 5 different guys here to where it's like you really can't say that this guy is by and large the wide receiver 2 here for this offense. It's a feature of Devaughn Vele one day, heavy feature. Like, for example, Tuesday's practice was a heavy feature of Pat Bryant and Troy Franklin with Bo Nix and Courtland Sutton and Evan Ingram. Those guys, the connection was thriving between all of them in Tuesday's practice against the defense. So for me, it's okay. These guys are playing different positions. Of course, Courtland, prototype wise, is probably going to be, a big X, but Sean likes to move Courtland into the slot. Sean likes to move Troy Franklin to the slot. He likes to play Troy at the Z position. Marvin is this guy who could play outside, could play inside the slot, can play in the backfield. So it really is about, I think, trying to make it positionless in a sense and say, hey, we can take advantage of different matchups and certain personnel packages. If we put Courtland in the slot, when the defense comes out in this grouping and we get a matchup on a smaller nickel defender, or we had like the matchup against a linebacker, whatever it may be. Like, that's how Sean views it. And so you are seeing all these guys rotate in. And to be honest with you, Sayre, I have such a difficult time believing that there's going to be an inactive wide receiver on the game day roster the way that there has been in the past. If 6 guys make this 53, Trent Sherfield is that 6th guy essentially, and Vele's still on the roster. All of these guys are going to play. They're going to get reps. They're going to get snaps. And I think that has kind of been established here throughout practice.
And I think that's what Sean Payton loves, right? He loves to mix up personnel groupings. He loves to use his skill position players as chess pieces. I mean, that's exactly why there was so much emphasis on the Joker spot this offseason. Evan Ingram coming in, playing a role that nobody has played the last 2 years. So not only did Sean have a top 10 offense in terms of points scored last year, but now you're adding a piece that there's nothing on film from last season. There's nothing. So you have a whole new wrinkle that you have to deal with. And you have all these young wide receivers that there's really not all that much film on either. Like, and to Sean's point, if you're talking about the pecking order at receiver last year, it's different almost any way that you slice it, right? Because in terms of snaps, wide receiver 2 was Lil Jordan Humphrey. In terms of targets, it was Devaughn Vele. In terms of receptions, wide receiver 3 was, Marvin Mims. And then in terms of targets, wide receiver 3 was Troy Franklin. There's so many different aspects of this that you can look at and say, all right, who's going to be this? These guys all serve their role, and each week, that's why I joke about the streamers at wide receiver, because we know on a given week, I mean, Courtland's probably going to get his share of targets. Evan's going to get his share of targets. Beyond that, I don't think I'd be drafting a Broncos wide receiver in fantasy and banking a lot on that guy being something. But hey, on a given week, if you're saying like, hey, I need this guy to step up and step in, like, take a risk on Marvin Mims, take a risk on Troy Franklin, take a shot and see what happens. But I just think that it's funny that this has become such a big deal when the reality is that we want all of these guys getting almost an equal number of targets because of what they can do for this team.
Yeah, and so much of that is dependent upon how well the run game does too. And I think if the run game is having a lot of success and then the Broncos start opening up the play action game a lot more, I think for a handful of these wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, more opportunities are going to open up in the passing game for them than I felt like last year, right? Because we all know, like Denver last year, their offense was predominantly, we're going to throw the football because we have to. We can't run the ball. But when you have success in one area and it forces the defense to kind of cheat up a little bit, saying, hey, we're going to load the box to try to stop the run, well, that's when you bite them with play action. That's where you hit that bootleg play that Jarrett Stidham hit Evan Ingram this past week against the Cardinals to Evan Ingram for a big yard catch and run at that point. Like, those opportunities open up, and you can start to see in the film how Sean is setting some things up for maybe the regular season. I'm excited. If you watch my film review this week, you are going to see exactly what I'm talking about. So make sure you check that out if you haven't. But I'm excited about this. A quick note on Tuesday's practice, Bo Nix in the offense. It was a sharp day for Bo. He was getting the ball out of his hands quickly, throwing against pressure, identifying the blitz, and finding guys like we mentioned, Pat Bryant, Troy Franklin, Courtland Sutton, Evan Ingram, getting the backs involved. J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey each had a couple of nice runs in practice. But we're at that point of training camp now, Sarah, where it's not like, what was the highlight of the day? No, it's not really that anymore. It is about refining the technique and the offense getting to where they need to be, the defense adjusting and getting to where they need to be. We're no longer like, okay, who won the day, the offense or the defense? That time of training camp is over, and that leads all to the final preseason game here on Saturday, where you get all the coverage, post-game coverage here. Sayre Bedinger, myself, Locked on Broncos. But Broncos Country, we're not done just yet. Not only did Nik Bonitto return to practice on Tuesday, but Dre Greenlaw, he was back, and he was in full pads. What does this mean for the defense? We'll go through that and much more here on today's episode of the show.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize that you just want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without all the stress. And with the money that you save on tickets, well, then you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it all possible. And Game Time also makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices in the Game Time app, they actually drop the closer that you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying.
They also have seat views inside the app, so you know exactly what the vantage point of the action is going to be like before you even buy your ticket or before you go. It makes it a lot easier there. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Dre Greenlaw was back in action for the Denver Broncos, fully dressed in pads and a full participant in the Broncos team period defensively. How important is this for the Broncos defense ahead of their regular season opener against the Tennessee Titans, which is coming up very, very soon here, and some other Broncos news and notes following Tuesday's practice. Real quick, I want to say thanks once again to all the everydayers in Broncos Country. Thanks for making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. We appreciate you all so much for making the show exactly what it is. Sarah, my friend, we've been following the Dre Greenlaw timeline for the last couple of weeks since he suffered that initial injury scare to his quad, where Sean Payton told us last week that it was more of a scar tissue type of thing that kind of flared up in his quad more so than it was an actual injury itself. So monitoring this, Dre returned to practice last week. He dressed but did not participate in the team periods. He was individual. Well, that changed on Tuesday. He was back, fully participated in pads in individual, and he was also fully participating in the Broncos team period defensively. Drew some praise from Nik Bonitto as well, saying this guy, he loves to hit people and that he brings the tenacity out of the defense. What does it mean for this Broncos defense to now have Dre Greenlaw fully back in the mix here?
It means everything. I mean, he was one of the biggest offseason acquisitions that this team made and one of the most important around the league, I would say, in terms of upgrading an area of weakness on a roster that's already pretty good. Dre Greenlaw has done that for the Denver Broncos, at least on paper. We know what he brings to the table from what we've all seen in San Francisco. And when he gets out onto the field for the Broncos, man, that's the thing that everybody is, again, just like with Evan Ingram offensively, we can't quite quantify what he's going to do to a defense that led the team in sacks last year, that created a lot of turnovers over the last two seasons. Like, this Broncos defense has already been very good. And now you're adding potentially a top 5 player at your weakest spot in the league. I mean, like that's what I'm excited for, Cody. That's why I've been saying, and you've been saying, we've all been saying, get this guy to week 1, whatever it takes. And it's great to hear that he's already back out there on the practice field, because we know that those reps, they're only going to serve to make him be playing faster right when the season starts in week 1 against the Titans.
I can't wait to see the actual tangible on-field results as to the impact of what Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga are going to bring to this defense, in other ways, and how it's going to help the guys next to them. How does Brandon Jones excel now even further with a guy like Hufanga next to him? How does the secondary, guys like Pat Surtain or Riley Moss, how do they excel? Because that pass rush is getting after quarterbacks a lot quicker, and it's forcing quicker, tighter throws. into maybe contested windows, more opportunities for takeaways this year. I think that those two guys can be difference makers to what you said was a defense that was already full of difference makers last season. And knock on wood, I hope that this unit and this room can stay healthy this upcoming season. They're going to be big for the Broncos, especially when Cam Ward comes to town. Because look, I think the more and more people talk about this, Sayre, I know people have already been talking about the Colts game week 2, saying, oh, Daniel Jones is starter, the Broncos should be 2-0. Don't do that. Like, I always hate when folks get ahead of themselves a little bit, because Cam Ward has got a pretty nice supporting cast of receivers around him. I think that Titans defense has some really talented players as well. I don't think Broncos fans should be sleeping on any team. We should not be right now at this point saying, okay, hey, the Broncos are going to get off to a 2-0 start. Take it one game at a time, folks. We're not even to the Tennessee game yet. Let's wait. Be patient. I always feel like that kind of jinxes things a little bit. I don't know. That's just me on my end. I don't know how you feel about that, but this is going to be a good test here for this Broncos defense early on, because they are going to get maybe a matchup here in week 1 against someone they don't really have a lot of film on the NFL level, that you're just trying to reference what the college tape looks like and how it may translate. It could, we don't know yet.
Yeah, we don't. And you got to do what you're expected to do in games like this if you're the Denver Broncos. So, yeah, fans can manifest all we want, right? We can say all we want. We can talk trash all we want. But at the end of the day, like, the team has to go out there and live up to those expectations. And they can't start slow. Like they might, but they can't, right? That's the whole mentality there. And that's where the fan expectations for the Broncos are always high. Cody, you know this, being there in Denver, like, it's always Super Bowl or bust. It's always, win as many games as possible. And I get the excitement, and I do. I really feel like Cam Ward, realistically speaking, going into an environment on the road, playing against the number 1 defense, like, everything's stacked up against him, but shoot, then he's out there playing with house money. And it's like, remember the game where Gardner Minshew early in his rookie season came to Denver as a 6th-round pick? I mean, we're talking about a guy that there was absolutely nothing that he could possibly do to go out there and win a game against, I believe, a Vic Fangio-led defense, Cody. And sure enough, it happened. So, yeah, crap happens in the NFL, and you've got to be ready for that, because anything can happen, especially week 1 where weird things happen. So there's no point in writing off the Titans at this point in time. Yeah. Let's have our fun after that game is over. But of course, yeah, the expectation should be you should go dominate a rookie quarterback. You should go as a top 10 offense that's gotten better this offseason, added a new wrinkle. You should go out there and beat this team. Like, you are better. They had the number 1 pick last year. They're not that good, but at the same time, they're good enough to win any given. That's the whole thing about any given Sunday, isn't it?
The NFL is a crazy game. It's why we love to watch it. It's why we love to cover it, though. Broncos country. One thing is Sean Payton did say, and he kind of highlighted the importance of this after practice. Nate Atkins means a little bit more to this Broncos offensive operation than most might think.
We'll continue to pay real close attention to the tight end wire and also the fullback. We had a few of those guys in to work out. We've always kind of had an F, and I think quietly Nate was one of those players that I don't know got a lot of attention, and yet, man, there was a lot of respect around the league and in the locker room for the way he did a number of things. So, it'd be good to get him back when we do. In the meantime, we've got to fill that void somehow.
It sounds like it should be Adam Prentice right away, right, Cody? The former Bronco, who is now a current Bronco once again. But yeah, Nate Atkins plays an underrated role. I think as everyone's been assembling their 53-man rosters this offseason, he's kind of been one of those guys that's easily negotiable for people who are putting stuff together on paper, but I don't think he's easily negotiable for Sean Payton.
Well, think about it this way, too. The more I've thought about it is that Denver has flexibility here. I mean, you look at Adam Prentice, he's a vested veteran. Michael Burton, a vested veteran. We don't know the timeline on Burton, but worst case scenario, when you go to do your 53, you waive those guys. You could sign them immediately to your practice squad because they're vested at this point. And then you have 3 elevations that you can use at any time throughout the season as long as they're on your practice squad. You have 3 practice squad to game day elevations. We saw that happen with Burton last year after roster cuts happened. Same thing with Lil Jordan Humphrey here. Denver's got flexibility, but really it seems like Nate Atkins is probably that primary favorite there. So They could maybe have a different approach from a number standpoint to building out this 53 and those guys who are vested. Sam Ehlinger is also a guy who would qualify as a vested veteran at this point as well. So Denver might have more flexibility with getting these guys back to the roster after cuts, more so than hoping some guys clear waivers. They can just sign these guys immediately back to it. So that is something I think we should keep an eye on here, especially as roster cuts happen next Tuesday. They go from 90 to 53. But in the meantime, Broncos country still got a lot of action this week here as the Broncos continue with the final days of training camp before their final matchup against the New Orleans Saints on Saturday morning, 11 a.m. Mountain Time kickoff. We'll have you covered. For all you everydayers, we appreciate you for rocking with us. Here's what you can expect on tomorrow's episode of the show. Sayre and I, we're going to sit down. We're going to highlight 3 players who have the most to prove in Saturday's preseason finale and why Audric Estime is the headliner of this conversation, especially at the running back position. We'll go through that and much more on tomorrow's episode. Locked On Broncos, Broncos Country. We'll see you then.